No one ever knows the exact second when it happens, because real falls never make noise. They aren't crashes or screams or endings announced with tragic fanfare. The important falls usually look like silence, a longer blink, a breath that suddenly feels heavy. I can't do this anymore, that never even gets spoken out loud. And that afternoon, as the Springfield sun slipped through a dirty window and the shadows drew cracks across the walls, Eleanor Abernathy simply let the books fall. She didn't faint, she didn't cry, she didn't shatter in public like the heroes in cheap tragedies. She just stopped carrying the world everyone demanded she hold. And in that small, almost invisible gesture, she began to disappear. The books hit the floor with a dull thud. There they were, the medical book, opened on a page filled with concepts she once devoured effortlessly. The law book, marked with tiny notes proving there had once been a fierce mind behind every paragraph. Both lay abandoned, cruel reminders of a greatness that no longer belonged to her. On the table, a cold cup of coffee observed the scene, a silent witness to endless nights spent trying to be extraordinary in a world that crushes anyone who tries too hard. Eleanor brought her hands to her face, and for the first time in years, she didn't want to continue. She didn't want to read or study or improve or impress or shine. She wanted just for a moment to stop existing for everyone, even for herself. And it's strange, isn't it? One might think the moment life changes is an epic battle against fate, a confrontation with some enormous, monstrous enemy. But sometimes the battle is against yourself, against that voice that keeps whispering, you have to be more, you have to handle everything, you must keep going even when it hurts. And when that voice breaks, when the machine inside finally cracks, everything else collapses with it. That's what happened to Eleanor. She didn't explode, she didn't scream, she dimmed, slowly, like a lamp flickering before it dies or a dream evaporating at dawn. At the doorway, a stray cat watched her with those immense eyes that neither judge nor demand. And she, without knowing why, reached out her hand and let it in. That was the first crack in the barrier that separated her from the world. Not a crack that lets in light, but one that lets silence seep through. And sometimes silence is more comfortable than life itself, because life speaks, yells, demands. Silence simply stays, like a cat. But to understand how she reached this point, we must go back, step into her past, into the origin of a little girl who once believed she could save the world. A little girl who didn't know that the world, sooner or later, demands a price no one is prepared to pay. Eleanor's story began long before she became the wandering ghost Springfield turned into a caricature. She was a prodigy child, one of those minds with an extra spark, a brightness that makes others uneasy. She could read since she learned to walk, grasped complex ideas at a speed that frightened her teachers, and her family, well-meaning but clumsy, believed they were obligated to turn that talent into a monument. You have to make the most of it, they repeated, not knowing that phrase can be a sentence. Because sometimes children don't need to make the most of their talent. They need to play, laugh, make mistakes. They need to be human before being brilliant. But Eleanor grew up believing she had to be perfect, that her intelligence wasn't a gift, but a debt. And so she began stacking responsibilities on her shoulders, one after another, until she could no longer distinguish where her own desires ended and where everyone else's expectations began. In school, she was the best. In high school, too. And that brilliance pushed her into a rhythm no young heart should endure. While others went out with friends, she memorized laws. While others discovered who they were, she became a gear of efficiency, precision, and excellence.
By 24, she was already a lawyer and a doctor. 2 degrees anyone would celebrate as a pinnacle of success. But for her, they were the beginning of the abyss. Because being extraordinary isn't always a triumph. Sometimes it's a sentence. And here lies something worth reflecting on. We live in a world that idolizes talent, productivity, the idea of be the best. But no one teaches us how to live under the pressure of being so. No one tells us that excellence can consume us, that brilliance can burn. Eleanor worked tirelessly, chained to her own potential. Sometimes she seemed happy, or at least that's what those who barely knew her believed. But deep down, there was a deaf loneliness, a feeling that without her achievements, she was nothing. And that is one of the cruelest traps life can set. The belief that we are only valuable when we perform, when we achieve something extraordinary. No one taught her she could be loved in failure, in imperfection, in fatigue. So she forced herself to continue, to outrun her own shadow. But you cannot run forever. You cannot hold the world indefinitely. First came the exhaustion, a deep fatigue that no amount of sleep could cure. Then came the moments of confusion, the anxiety disguised as normalcy, the growing isolation. She stopped seeing her friends, stopped eating well, stopped breathing without guilt. Until one day she no longer recognized herself. She was a brilliant mind trapped in an exhausted body, in a heart that could no longer bear the weight of everyone's expectations. And so we returned to that afternoon, when the books fell to the floor, when the first cat walked into her life like someone stepping into a collapsing building in search of warmth. It wasn't a heroic act or a symbolic moment. It was minimal. Almost absurd. But sometimes life changes that way, with a small gesture that opens the door to something much bigger or much darker. The next day, Eleanor didn't go to work, nor the next one. She began shutting herself in, withdrawing from the real world, living in a space where no one asked anything of her. Her home became a fortress of abandonment. Cats arrived one after another, drawn by an instinct only they understand. And Eleanor welcomed them, not because she loved cats in a traditional sense, but because they represented a life without demands, a simple existence, a companionship that didn't criticize, didn't judge, didn't expect excellence. In them she found refuge, a pause, an excuse not to return to the world that had crushed her. And here another reflection arises. Sometimes we seek refuge in things others consider absurd. A hobby, a routine, a corner of the world where no one bothers us. They are not always healthy. They are not always rational. But they are our silent trenches against reality. Eleanor chose cats. Others choose work, screens, toxic relationships, impossible goals. Each person carries their own way of escaping, because we are all running from something, even if we don't always know what. Springfield, with its grotesque humor and chronic indifference, never once wondered what had happened to her. To them, the crazy cat lady was just that, a caricature, a recurring joke. A woman throwing cats as if life were an endless sketch. No one stopped to think about the story behind those wild eyes. No one imagined the prodigy child, the brilliant student, the extraordinary professional who lived under more pressure than any soul should ever endure. But stories that seem ridiculous often hide deep tragedies, and the laughter provoked by an exaggerated character is often an uncomfortable mirror of what we fear to confront in ourselves. This is the first part of her story. And to truly understand it, we must keep descending through the corridors of her life. Those where genius, loneliness, madness, and that strange glow found only in people who once touched the sky and then fell without anyone reaching out. There is a moment in life when the body keeps moving forward, but the soul is already limping behind, asking for a pause it never receives.
That moment came for Eleanor Abernathy long before Springfield knew her as the deranged woman who threw cats into the air. It arrived quietly, disguised as routine, just as tragedies that never become news but always become scars tend to arrive.
After years of building a prestige she could barely uphold, Eleanor began to notice small cracks, the soft tremble in her hands, the nights when insomnia was no longer an accident but a fixed companion. The mechanical smile she put on before entering any place, as if it were a mandatory part of her uniform. None of it seemed serious, and yet it was like watching an ancient statue begin to fracture. The damage had been there for a long time, only no one had seen it. The real collapse doesn't happen when everything breaks, but when you realize that no one is extending a hand to help you pick up the pieces. The day she lost her job, Eleanor didn't cry. She simply stood still, staring at the empty chair where she had so often dreamed of becoming someone important. That was when she understood one of adulthood's most painful truths, that in the real world, being good doesn't guarantee being seen, and being brilliant doesn't guarantee being needed. That discovery didn't destroy her immediately, but it began wearing her down from the inside, like rust no one cleans because it's not visible yet. And this is where we must pause, because this is not only her story, it is everyone's. Who hasn't felt at least once that they give more than they receive? Who hasn't carried expectations so heavy they start bending their back? Who hasn't loved a dream until that dream began to demand too much? Loneliness came afterward, slow and poisonous. Not the pretty loneliness of a quiet cafe, but the rough kind, the one that fills homes with sounds that don't exist, the kind that turns every corner into a reminder that no one is thinking about you. Eleanor waited for calls, messages, a simple, "Are you okay?" But the only thing that arrived was silence. A silence so deep, it felt like an abyss. In that silence, she found her first cat. Or perhaps he found her. It doesn't matter. What matters is that for the first time in a long time, someone looked at her without demanding perfection. But some refuges are also traps. That small act of tenderness became a pattern. Each new cat covered an emotional crack. Every meow silenced a painful thought. Every feline gaze filled a void no person had bothered to notice. Eleanor wasn't looking for animals. She was looking for a way not to fall apart. And here, another pause, because this part touches all of us. We don't always escape with cats, of course. Sometimes we escape with work, or with parties, or with social media, or with promises of a future that never arrives. We all have something we use to avoid feeling what hurts to feel. What sets Eleanor apart is not her madness, but that she experienced her collapse in front of an entire town that preferred to laugh instead of listen. The cats filled her life in the same way someone fills a room with boxes to avoid seeing the cracked walls. And one day, without noticing, she could no longer walk without tripping over them. Order disappeared. Hygiene disappeared. She disappeared. It was so gradual that from the outside, it looked like a joke. From the inside, it was a slow tragedy, like watching a flower wilt in slow motion. Her mind began to fragment, not abruptly, but in whispers. Mild forgetfulness, laughter out of place, conversations that no longer made sense. And the most terrible thing is that the town did interpret any of this as a call for help, but as entertainment. Springfield turned her into a character before she had the chance to become a person again. And when she realized this, when she understood that no one saw her as Eleanor anymore, but as the crazy cat lady, her heart made that sound something makes when it breaks for the last time. That was her turning point. The moment when she stopped fighting to become who she once was and began accepting who the world said she should be. She didn't give up because she wanted to. She gave up because no one stopped her when she began to fall.
The fall of Eleanor had no applause, no witnesses, no rescue. It had meows, the smell of old dust, and a closed window facing a world that no longer remembered her. Sometimes we picture her throwing cats and mumbling incoherently, but what we really see is just the surface of something far more painful, a woman who tried to hold herself together alone for far too long. As the years passed, her identity dissolved into a caricature. She wasn't the brilliant student, nor the prodigy lawyer, nor the tireless doctor. She was only the crazy cat lady, a cruel title that hid a story anyone could have lived if they had carried their burdens in silence. The most tragic part is not her madness, but that no one stopped her in time. No one said enough. No one said, "Come here, rest for a moment." And that is where her story becomes an uncomfortable mirror for all of us. Because we all carry something. We all pretend to be fine more times than we admit. We've all felt that exhaustion that sleep cannot fix, that knot in the throat we hide within "I'm okay," that fear of failing that forces us to demand more from ourselves than we can really give. And the truth is simpler and harsher than it seems. People don't break from one big blow. They break from many small ones that no one saw. Eleanor ended the way she did because she never allowed herself to be human. She didn't accept limits. She didn't ask for help. She didn't acknowledge that she also had the right to stop. And because no one around her took the time to look beyond the facade. That's why her story shouldn't leave us laughing, but with a small tremor in the soul, a gentle warning. So remember, don't demand yourself to be extraordinary every day. Life isn't designed for perfection, but for endurance. Surround yourself with people who truly see you, not people who only applaud you. Applause flatters, but company heals. And above all, remember that you don't have to carry the whole world for the world to love you. Eleanor believed she was only worthy if she was perfect, and that was her final mistake. We still have time to choose differently. If this story moved something inside you, even a little, if at any moment you felt that a sentence spoke directly to you, then I invite you to stay, to subscribe, to leave your like, to comment what resonated with you the most. Because every comment, every interaction keeps alive this conversation about who we are, what we feel, and the silent battles we all carry. So if you want more stories like this, more reflections, more intimate journeys through characters you thought you knew, this is your place. And your voice, your like, your comment, help this remain alive. See you in the next chapter.